I think this was for us. Hello. Good morning, everyone. I know this is an early session, and I know this is the first one to come to, so we are very grateful to have you here. And I am thrilled to be moderating a panel with these amazing practitioners who do both investigative journalism and deep engagement journalism, especially because they do so for some of the world's most underserved communities. I want to start this panel by really contextualizing this moment that we're in right now in journalism, just so that you can get a better feel for how this work is situated. For decades, the modus operandi for journalists, especially investigative journalists, was to write a story, publish it, and then let the work do its thing, let the television stations, the radio stations, and the newspapers do their thing. But this is not the media ecosystem that we inhabit now. Because now we are in a less simple time. We are in an internet age where every media infrastructure is completely fractured, and where also people from underrepresented backgrounds who've often been profiled in stories can actually hold the people who are writing about them accountable. And so now, as we're in a different place, I want to showcase some of the work that has been done around the world to really bring investigations that were written about underserved communities to those communities. How to start from the community, how to write the story with that community in mind, and how to make sure that that information goes to them. So today we are going to start out, just so that you know, with a set of presentations from everyone, because it is always easier to watch as other people did. Then we're going to go into a few quick questions and leave about 10 minutes for Q&A. But before we start, let's get some introductions going. We'll go from my left to the right. Let's go.
Hi there. I am really, really grateful to having you here. To be here is kind of like this experience on being for first time in Athens has been amazing. And yes, I worked 3 years ago with the Pulitzer Center as outreach program manager. I'm so happy and excited to join a team of international practitioners and experts that we are trying to figure out what is the best way to engage new audiences and communities.
Max?
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here and for this opportunity to speak to you. I'm Max Siegelbaum. I'm currently the editor-in-chief of Documented, soon to be the special projects editor.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Nicole Lewis. I'm the engagement editor at the Marshall Project, and we are a nonprofit newsroom based in New York City that covers the criminal justice system. And in my role, I work to make sure that we're creating, editorial projects that reach justice-affected communities. So that could mean folks in prison, folks who've come out of prison, their families, and on and on.
So if you need anything from my slides, we'd like to give you something to take away. Take a photo of this now. This will give you the QR code for the slides with all the information on it. And then we're going to start with Nicole, then go on to Max, Jonathan, and then myself. Go ahead.
Thank you. Let's see what we've got. That's us. This is me. So the Marshall Project has been around for about a decade now, and it was founded with the mission to really create and sustain a sense of urgency about the criminal justice system in the United States. So for those of you who are coming, from around the world, there are about 2.2 million people in the United States who are incarcerated. We have the highest sort of carceral rate than any other nation by a large margin. And so there are lots of reasons why deep, moving investigative journalism is really important to creating change within that system. So it's a little sense of our mission. We do not consider ourselves in any way as advocates, right? We're not campaigning. We're not thinking about specific reforms. We're there to really explore some of the, ideas at the forefront of change, test them, right? Report the truth, connect with people, raise up kind of the larger movement in the United States. But we do think a ton about impact, right? We think about laws getting changed. We are an investigative shop. We think about accountability. We think about when there's harm, abuse, wrongdoing, right? How do we shine a light and help hold those actors accountable. But as part of that work, for many years, what we realized was we were doing work about people who had been affected by the system, but we were not creating work for them. So if you can imagine, if you spend a year reporting out a story about abuse in a jail or abuse in a prison, well, the main kernel of what you're unearthing is not actually news to the people who are incarcerated in that prison or in that jail, right? They know that the conditions are horrific and they know that the guards are abusive. What do we do? Our investigations sort of leave them in the same spot, even if they are moving and compelling policymakers into action. So there's a real sort of question here about how could we shape journalism or create editorial projects that actually speak directly to people at the center of our investigations. And so today I want to tell you a little bit about one project that's actually based in one of our local news teams in Cleveland, Ohio. We do national work, but we also have some really focused local work as well. And it's a little bit easier to talk about engagement journalism on the local level, right? We're really embedded within a community. So that project is called Testify. We had unprecedented access into charging records out of the court system in Cuyahoga County, so the county that Cleveland is within. And it is very hard to get access to this data. The prosecutor's office in the United States, typically a very black box. We don't really know how they make decisions when someone gets initially indicted and arraigned, right? They may be charged with one thing, they may wind up being convicted of something else. Plea deals, right? 90-some-odd% of people actually never go to trial. They take a plea, and so it's very hard to understand all the forces and mechanisms at play within that process. The reason is that anytime you say, well, turn over, I want to see those documents, right? I want to see the data behind this. If we create a records request, well, it's part of an ongoing investigation. So we can't really get them. So we had unprecedented access because we found someone who had happened to find a way to scrape what existed online and pull it into a mega data set. So think about the traditional way an investigation usually happens. We would take all this data and we would spend years trying to parse it and come up with stories that reveal something about what's going on in Cuyahoga County. We would do that mostly out of the sight of the public. We would do it probably with no public interaction, no public comment, and we would publish multiple investigations about what we found. We didn't want to do that, right? We really said Cuyahoga County is a pretty small place, but there are thousands of people who are implicated in this data. This data isn't just like abstract, it's about people's lives, right? It's people who had been ensnared in the system. Well, what happens to them on the other side? What does it mean when someone goes to jail for even just 24 hours and then their charges are dropped? It's possible that they lost their job, right? There's so many implications. So where we started was really flipping the traditional investigative frame on its head and saying, let's actually ask the community what they might want to know about this data set. Let's, for the first time, explain to people what we have and then start with the questions that the community is generating, what they're telling us they're most interested in. It's a simple play for trying to get your stories read. You asked us a question, hey, we answered it for you, right? Just sort of on a baseline level. But it's also a better way to kind of tone in and tap into the current sort of movement that's happening on the ground, right? So there's many reasons why we think this work is really important. I'm trying to think if I should read any of this. This is just sort of signifying that, like, we started with going to the community and said, explaining what we do. What does it mean to scrape something? What records do we have, right? We spent months gathering questions from the community, and those questions will help us explore the points where injustice creeps into the system. So here's some practical ways that we did that, right? These are not super high tech. There's some really accessible ways. We said, how about you just give us a call? We put up a phone number, right? We created a hotline. We linked text and calls and all of the chats into a Slack channel for us so we could monitor what people were asking, right? We just solicited questions. We just did this over and over again. We got on the radio and we said, hey, we're the Marshall Project. This is what we've got. Here's what it means to scrape records. What questions do you have? Have you been through the system, right? And we just did this again and again and again until we had a nice sort of fount of questions to draw from. And from that, we created a few news products. So on the left, on my left is a sort of screenshot of an FAQ project that we made. So we just directly, some questions we knew were not as complex. They didn't warrant a deeper dive. They were just simple requests for information that no one had before. So we created an FAQ tool. We just said, you asked, we answered, right? The screenshot of who's really cycling in and out of Cleveland's courts is more of a deeper look at the fact that so many people were sort of this term in the criminal justice is repeat offenders, but who were there for really low-level kinds of things, right? Things that could absolutely be solved by social systems as opposed to carceral systems. So drug addiction, right? Some really small things. And a vast majority of the people represented in this data set were just the same people coming in and out again and again. So just think about this on a taxpayer level, right? In the United States, the criminal justice system is funded by taxpayers. Does it really make sense to spend our money this way if it's the same folks again and again just cycling in and out? So all of these kind of questions led us to different pieces of the story. And then from there, and this is years in the making, so we just kept following the tail. We realized that people were really interested in the systems actors. So they were like, that's great that you've got the data. We kind of know everything's screwed up, but we really want to know about specific judges' records. Are they harsh on sentencing? Are they super punitive? Do they give people probation? Do they send people to diversion courts? Like, you have access to that data. We want to know because we're voting for these people. These are folks that we get to elect. So we created a judge guide, and we said, great, we'll try to answer that for you as well, and we'll put it in formats that are accessible to you. We'll make it a flyer, and we'll put it on your phone, and we'll make a bus shelter ad so you can scan a QR code. That nobody did. That didn't work, so don't do that. But good to know now, right? So we made a judge guide. And then within that judge guide, right, not only we replicated the same model, we said it's not enough for us to decide what we think is important. We got to go back to people and say, well, what do you actually want to know about your judges, the people that you're going to choose to represent you? So we did that, right? So just a lot of repetition of figuring out if you have a really unique asset, a really unique record request, really unique source of information that you could completely spend years with your 4 journalists and your editor and your team just parsing and figuring out something beautiful to say. Absolutely, that is a functional way of doing this work. But we figured, why not really go for impact by opening up this process, doing it in public, asking the community, tapping into what they really care about, and just answering their basic questions. And some moving investigations came out of it, obviously, too. And this is just to say, I know one of the currencies in our industry is awards. I could talk all day about what the impact of this is, but I figured I'd sort of start here. You'll hear about other cases of impact. This is award-winning work. I always say that because I know that there are skeptical editors in the room who are like, why would we spend so much? Why would we make, right? Because you need this. We need this in order to sustain ourselves, in order to say our work, yes, it makes impact, it changes laws, but also it is path-breaking, right? It gets the industry's attention. There is merit, deep, serious merit that can be recognized. So that is just a small example of some of the engagement work we do at the Marshall Project.
Thank you.
Great. So Documented, just to give you a little background, local newsroom based in New York City, and we are dedicated to covering the city's immigrant communities and the issues that matter to them. We publish in 4 languages on multiple platforms, and we make it a mission to solicit their opinion and base our editorial strategy on that, really our entire mission on that, getting at exactly what they're concerned with and what information they need to know to better their lives and become safer and healthier in their communities. And this is just a briefer way of saying that. So I want to talk about a project that I've worked on for the past 5 years that started here in the Don Bosco Worker Center in Port Chester, New York. The beginning of Documented, this was around 2018, the co-founder of Documented and I, Mazen Ahmed, traveled up here as part of a listening tour where we were going around to different community organizations and asking them, what are you concerned with? What are the people who you work with? What are their concerns? And how can we report on that? And we ended up here, and we spoke to the man who runs it. And Don Bosco is a day laborer corner slash kind of know your rights center. So it's just a general place where workers in the area can go to get help. And he took us up to his office. He was telling us about the different issues they faced. And in our travels, we had spoken to people about all sorts of things. But they kept coming around to the same issue, which was that our people, they can't get paid. They work 40, 50, 60 hours a week at these backbreaking jobs. And at the end, when it's time to get paid, their boss says, I'm sorry, I don't have enough money. In the worst cases, I'm not going to pay you, and if you report me, I'm going to report you to ICE, which is the deportation forces in America. So he was telling us about this, and he was telling us about 2 cases that he worked on. And both of them were against the same tree trimming business in Connecticut, a year apart, 2 different workers, and the state authority that was supposed to regulate the payment of workers had found that they had stolen their wages. They had violated the law twice in the span of 2 years. And his point to us was that they keep doing this, and they keep getting away with it, and no one is doing anything about it. So I left that meeting thinking about what I could do as a journalist and how I could contribute to this in a way that felt substantial. And I started doing research. And I found that there were 2 agencies that work on this issue, the National Department of Labor and the local Department of Labor in New York State. And we filed an information request. And that is a multi-year saga where we had to sue them. We had to get the governor's office involved. We had to use all these different channels to get them to finally give us the data, which is where we brought in LAM to help us analyze it. And eventually we did. We were able to collect really the state's first, most substantial database on this issue. And we did 2 things. We analyzed it as normal investigative journalism. And we partnered with ProPublica to run a series of 3 articles about this, where we found tax dollars were going to bad acting businesses. We found that just the first significant count of the amount of wages that had been stolen, and also that the state, even when they were finding companies guilty, they were failing to get the money back to the workers. And then we did another thing. We decided that it wasn't enough. You know, this is a systemic issue, and you could write 1 story about it, you could write 100 stories about it, and you would never really be able to get across to the readers just how prevalent this is. So we decided to let the readers tell their own story. You know, if you live in New York State, there is a chance that a business that you know and maybe you love has stolen their workers' wages. And you can only really understand that until you can see this. You can go to your, so this nywagetheft.com, you can go to your block, you can go to where your parents live, where your partner lives, where your work is, and you can see if a business near you has stolen wages. And I just pulled this one example. On the top is Meg Ryan. I don't know if it's the Meg Ryan, but I like to think that it is. And the other reason we did this was that we felt like workers needed an easy way to find this information. And oftentimes people, especially in the construction industry in New York, they don't know who they're actually working for. They may know the address they were sent to, they show up, and you know, go for the work for the day and leave, but they don't know the name of the person who they're working for. So this gives them an outlet to kind of scan around and look for things. And it's also been enormously helpful for labor lawyers in filing their cases against the government. So this is just some of the impact it's had. A state legislator introduced a new bill to enable the state to better collect wages that have been stolen. The state agency that regulates horse racing changed the rules around wage theft. It was covered in English language press, a Spanish language press, which was really just amplifying the message. And then what I find exciting is that, find it all exciting, but this in particular, other journalists were using this data to write their own stories. So you have one example of famous pizza place in New York, Grimaldi's. That was used in the coverage, and then on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, another story. So what's next is that we will continue to do this work. We're not satisfied with the level of reach it has with the workers and with people in New York City. So on my left, which is your right, you will see an ad campaign where we're going to use the tools that Meta has created to target people with ads and use various information in their background. And we're going to use that to spread the word of which businesses have stolen wages. So if you are a parent who lives in Manhattan, we will look at schools that have stolen wages. If you're a restaurant worker who lives in Queens or Jackson Heights, Queens, which is a smaller neighborhood, we'll look at restaurants in that area and really just try and slice it and get it in front of people, because we wrote probably a cumulative 9,000 words on this. It could reach more people. And then there's a more detailed way of reporters using it. So thank you.
Thank you, really inspiring examples. Like at the Pulitzer Center, we are also doing a significant effort to shape a model where we just not only support breakthrough journalism around the world, but also we are exploring new ways on how we can experiment with approaches on terms of like outreach and educational strategies that really reach new audiences. So at the heart of our work is kind of like how we can make complex issues, how we can make these very critical humankind issues relevant and inspire action, but how we can promote also agency in multiple topics like environment, governance, like climate issues, intelligence, artificial intelligence, and more, but really inspiring action and really tackling the kind of like most common and difficult issues and challenges that communities are facing. Because at the heart of our work is a commitment to really provide to the world a platform where we can really have the most powerful, consequential journalism, but also this journalism needs to serve every daily life to mobilize the society in order to really create strategies that engage and tackle systemic challenges. Our mission is really connected now with tackle these challenges together with the communities. And we are really thinking that if communities actively engage in the issues that we are reporting, in the stories that we are supporting, we can find solutions together between multiple stakeholders and people that is really affected by the, for example, climate issues. So that's the reason why 3 years ago, we started an international and education outreach team. This team, which I had been working in, especially focusing Latin America, had really built a kind of like growing ecosystem or environment of initiatives where we are merging editorial and journalistic projects with engagement and outreach and education strategies. This vibrant kind of like ecosystem that you can see there, there comes from the Rainforest Investigations Networks through the Ocean Reporting Network until initiatives like the Mekong Influencer Initiative, where in Southeast Asia, influencers are creating powerful content and reels inspired by the stories that we provide them, supported by our reports, and they are reaching millions of audiences. So with these meets and this merging of like editorial and engagement approaches, we really want to empower communities, we really want to empower targeted audiences, and we really want to provide them like new ways of engage and feel the interconnection, for example, with topics like rainforests or oceans that can be relevant to their daily lives. So one way that we are achieving this is also, for example, another way is in the Republic Democratic of Congo. Our program manager there, my colleague there, creates a network of teachers where they are influencing the national curriculum or including, like in the national curriculum, environmental stories as part of the pedagogical tools that they can use in everyday life classes. So the other kind of like example is the Impact Seed Funding, a global initiative that we launched recently, and this year was the global approach, especially focused on Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where scientists, universities, journalists gather together to explore these reporting stories, but also implemented impactful initiatives inside their communities to understand better how together find solutions together to the challenges that they can find in the stories. So as part of the work that I am developing in Latin America, we are focusing in very specific target audiences where young people can understand better the issues, and we are creating through a kind of like offline and online experience, user journeys where across Latin America, young audiences can really understand at the right time, at the right moment, at the right format, how they can be part of the solutions and promote agency between them. And we have like a very specific activity, which is the one that I want to bring you to explore, which was a content letter. It's a content letter. We are the second version of this content letter. It was inspired by a content letter that was initially organized in the US, and now we bring it to Latin America. And during this content letter, we had organized, for example, 50 workshops with underserved communities. We had been in the Amazon rainforest, in 6 of the Amazon rainforest countries with communities, working with them, explaining to them the stories that reporters from our Rainforest Investigations Network create about the deforestation issues, the problems behind like the mining, the destruction of the rainforest and the deforestation. And these 50 workshops had really been an amazing tool to engage really the communities and the voices that we want to most amplify. And I want to bring the story of like one of the winners of last year's contest. These are kind of like part of the campaigns behind the contest letter. We organize workshops, sessions with these young audiences in multiple cities, countries, and Amazon rainforest regions and remote communities. And we had received so far almost 2,000 letters, 2,000 young people had been engaged with our reporting stories, 50 grantees and fellows which write stories have been also part of this contest. And it has been a great way to, through a simple action, writing a letter of 500 words, really engage civic action and really start to connect properly with what is the role that I should have around, for example, the Amazon rainforest destruction. So Henry, our winner, he is part of like an Amazon rainforest community. He lives in an indigenous community, and he received one of the workshops. It was the first time for him for fully reading a full, complete story. The story that they read in the workshop was about illegal trafficking of jaguars. So he learns that day that these jaguars that are partners of their community, that are around of their reserve in the Amazon rainforest, had been trafficked illegally into Asian markets. And once he gets inspired by this story, he really wrote a very deep kind of like letter on why this issue was affecting the communities. And not just that, the letters inspired to ask for solutions, to really engage with decision makers, to explore what are the solutions to protect, for example, in this case, the jaguars that they were trafficking in their community, in his community. And as a winner of the last year contest, we support one environmental action for him, and he's leading and supporting this year an environmental work that is looking or pursuing to protect the jaguars. So this is one of 1,000 young citizens that have been engaged with these activities. This model is the model that we want to embrace in the Persist Center, a model that really inspires and promotes agencies among very specific target audiences with innovative approach, with ways where we expand the reach of journalism and really try to connect with audiences and really trying to create at the end an impact through a clearly theory of change, which, for example, in this case, allow to amplify the voices of the indigenous communities as also be part of the solution.
Hola, muy buenos días. Mi nombre es Henry Gregorio Vázquez. Soy de la comunidad San Martín de Macayaco. Trabajo para la Guardia Indígena Ambiental. Hice partícipe en las cartas por nuestra Amazonía y gracias a ello pues recordé las enseñanzas de mi abuelo para proteger la selva y el medio ambiente. Les quiero hacer la invitación a los demás jóvenes que se inscriban a la nueva versión de cartas por nuestra Amazonía, porque es un ejercicio importante y muy interesante. Muchas gracias.
So thank you. He's inviting us to join this year's contest. It closed, the deadline is October 31, and we want to continue expanding this contest through all the region.
I love hearing all of this because I know these folks, and for me, this is absolutely delicious and wonderful and inspiring because I get to know them a little better. So I hope you're getting some fun stuff out of this too. I'm here to speak a little bit about misinformation reporting, and I know I've been working in the space of mis and disinformation since 2016, since a certain election kind of upended our understanding of how our media ecosystem works. And to my shame, even in those years where I've traveled from big institution to big institution, scraping information from the internet and analyzing it, I had mostly done it in the English language realm. Now, I'm a German citizen, the daughter of refugees who moved from Vietnam to Germany, and I speak multiple languages, and I figured that at some point I need to start looking at communities that are living in the shadows and are not served by mainstream institutions that I worked for. And so I wanted to better understand how does misinformation and disinformation thrive in communities that don't speak English. And I will take you to Oakland, California. We have a resident from here, right? This is a community in Oakland, California of people who were political prisoners, people who came in through political asylum and other places, types of programs through US, who have been in the US for maybe like 10, 20 years, but don't speak very much English and get most of their information from YouTube. I found that out by doing individual interviews with these folks, focus groups with these folks, kind of standing in a room, waving my hands, speaking my broken Vietnamese about misinformation, and asked them, where do you get your information? And they told me, YouTube. And so we asked one of the community members to give us an insight into her YouTube archive, and I call these a quantified selfie. This is a way of looking at the data that people leave behind on the internet and the watch history of one person. 17,000 views on YouTube that she granted us access to look for, to better understand what does the larger media ecosystem look like that she inhabits. If YouTube is the only place where she gets information, what does that look like? And so for this particular exercise, we looked at 1,000 randomized samples from that data set and found that she gets a lot of news from YouTube, but she also gets religious guidance from monks on YouTube. She gets instructional videos. How do you cook this dish? How do you make this? How do you apply for a tax return? And she gets a lot of health information from YouTube. This is where misinformation sits in the only vital source of information that she has. So now we've seen and understood what are the needs, the information needs of this one community that are not met, and what is the vacuum that is created by not being able to speak English or speak the language of your country that you're in right now. And so we started out by looking into an investigation, by looking at one news influencer that we found in that data. Her name, probably not her real name because I've been trying to find her, is Sonia Olala. Makes no sense. But she is a Vietnamese woman who is very young, looks like she's been sort of like, has these beauty filters on every day, and she addresses the elders with a lot of respect in Vietnamese. And she translates news from English into Vietnamese. But among her many sources, the one that she cited the most was a very small, niche, far-right-wing institution called the Gateway Pundit that has, by various experts, been deemed a conspiracy theory kind of website. The Gateway Pundit, Breitbart, Newsmax, you've probably heard some of the headlines around these news institutions. She translates them directly from English to Vietnamese for the Vietnamese. She has, I think on average we found out through this investigation, she publishes 8 videos a week. Who here has done video? How fast can you produce a video? She has this beautiful green screen kind of like graphics-driven kind of look. And this is the kind of information that now addresses people's needs, and all she does is translate misinformation, right? And so this was sort of like a problem that we found, and we didn't want to stop there. And I think that's what a lot of you have like thought about. Our obsession with investigations is to look at the harm that is done and try to like actualize change from that. And I think one of the things that we always forget is how do we empower people in the same breath. In misinformation, there is a very, very clear fascination with the problem, and there's very little that we've done to actually empower people to know how to navigate this. And so I do think that all of you have shown this, that every investigation needs to go alongside with service journalism. And so what we did was we started addressing that with probably one of the most powerful players in that realm. It's daughters and sons of immigrants, right? I am a daughter of 2 immigrants, have the capacity to transverse between 2 cultures and to explain things. But oftentimes, there's also a cultural disconnect. If I talk back to my mom and say, you are consuming terrible information, she's like, you disrespectful little girl, right? Like, you've probably had a parent like that. I had. I was raised right, I think. But, but with that said, we wanted to address that by writing an article that provides service, like interesting information for them and instructions on how do you actually talk about misinformation to your loved ones. And this was reporting that was basically coming out of the investigation we did. And so we were able to publish this alongside the investigation as well. But we didn't stop there. We also wanted to showcase that even within the community, these shadow communities that are often not seen by mainstream institutions, there are people who are already fighting the fight. And I want to introduce you to one of my favorite people that I found through this. Her name is Mai Bui. She's a retired software engineer. At 67, she found out that the Vietnamese community had been consuming a lot of misinformation, and she was like, I'm going to subscribe, use my retirement money, I'm going to subscribe to 6 mainstream institutions, the Washington Post, the New York Times, Political, all of these places, and I'm going to start translating this, and I'm going to become a YouTuber at the age of 67. She now has 10 to 20,000 viewers every week, and because we profiled her, what was really beautiful is that her profile has been sort of like elevated. She has now been featured in this little, again, the San Francisco Connection, in this poster campaign all over San Francisco and Oakland and the Bay Area at large, where she was placarded in all of the subway stations, and her work has been really highlighted through that. She's been interviewed by various people. She's now appeared on documentaries as well, and she still keeps doing this every week. While she's babysitting her grandchildren, she's translating articles, right? What's also interesting is that with her and her colleagues, we have now taken our journalism, the investigations, the service journalism, and appeared on YouTubers' videos. You can see me looking a little panicked and being like, algorithms, this is how they work, right? With my really broken Vietnamese. But these videos, as you can see here, have received 14,000 views, which is maybe to a New York Times or a Washington Post is not a big audience. But 14,000 Vietnamese speakers in the US, that is a sizable amount of the exact right audience that I want to reach, not just a drive-by audience that clicks on something. And that has been a really lovely, interesting way of understanding that you shouldn't stop with just publishing the investigation. You have to find a way of bringing that information to the people who are the most impacted by this. And last but not least, we did a lot of workshops. What was really interesting was that, as we all know, most people who are sort of living on the margins, so to speak, don't have access to the internet. They don't scan QR codes, right? And so what you want to do is try to show up in person as well. I think that builds a lot of trust. And it also builds a different accountability than trying to yap at someone on a YouTube channel. And so we started with a workshop series where we went back to the same community that we talked to. We then said, here are the problems in your media ecosystem. Here are the ways in which you can address them, from installing Google Translate all the way to looking at these Vietnamese language reputable news organizations, right? Or to helping people distinguish between, and this is real, a whole room of senior citizens guessing which photo was a deep fake and which one was real, right? Just for those of you who want to know the way in which I explained what AI is to senior citizens who had never heard about AI is cái đó là cái máy nó học cái mặt của mày, nó làm cái mặt mới. So it's a machine that learns your face and makes a new face, right? And so it's not ideal. It is not the most intellectual thing you could imagine, but it has helped the senior citizens understand that there are deep fakes out there, that there might be scammed out there. And just to give you some context, a former grantee of the Pulitzer Center has recently unveiled through her story that I think in India, politicians have used deepfakes to have lent their voice to AI to make 50 million or so, 40 million deepfake calls to to voters in this past election. And so this is really technology exported from the US to wreak havoc in every part of the global majority, or the global south, however you want to call it, as well as within communities that are often not English speaking. And just to give you an idea about these workshops, they might seem like a small effort that doesn't do anything. We have now had people reach out to us who took the slides, young Vietnamese people like me, and have done the workshops in Seattle, in Orange County, in Los Angeles. We are going to Boston, to Philadelphia. There's also a place in Montreal that wants to do it. And in San Jose, someone is doing it this coming Saturday when I'm coming over, right? And also to hark back to Nicole, people oftentimes see engagement journalism as unglamorous and the least valuable thing. We won 3 awards with this, but also that's not even a big thing. We were able to get funding through this, right? People see an actual imprint of what we did and are funding this journalism further. And we have now also, now I work with Documented, there's the nepotism here. We have also been able to bring this reporting into the Chinese community, into the Senegalese community, which published yesterday, and we're gonna try to bring it into the Spanish-speaking community as well. And so I do think that for a lot of people, this last step of thinking of the audience, this last step of thinking of how to distribute your content should really be at the beginning, as all of these speakers have shown. Anyhow, that is misinformation. We have 7 minutes left. So I don't think we can go through our questions, but we wanted to give you ample time to ask your own questions. Otherwise, I'm going to throw it back to the audience. Anyone have any questions about this? Yes, in the back. Shout it and I'll repeat it.
Child of it.
Oh, there we go.
Hello, child of immigrants here. Recognize a lot of that stuff. When you were talking actually about the young YouTuber, and you talked about she shows respect to elders, and then you talk about your parents, and like if we challenge them, my dad's become like a Hindu fundamentalist now. You know, it's about respect. And in a way, what that brought home to me was how what you're all talking about is showing respect to people. And in a way, isn't that the failure of mainstream organizations, because we're talking down to immigrant communities and so on? And so I wonder if you'd like, I want to talk about like how you're showing respect through what you do.
You want to start? Take it.
So you can imagine respect is such an important issue when it comes to people who've been ensnared, who've committed violence, felons, people who have criminal records, right? the news media, especially locally, loves to dramatize crime. That is a huge aspect in the American news media. And so we're often only talking about people's worst days, right? Things that are unfortunately defining them for life. And we don't go back to sort of say, well, what else is here? So I think our work really does flip that frame on its head and say, there's something that the community knows about what's happening in and around this community. There's some form of knowledge and information that's being translated and shared here. It's our job to try to understand that and sort of tap into it. And so we do think a lot about humanizing work, humanizing language, right? Dignity, not trying to just perpetuate really flattening and stereotypical notions of people who've committed violence or who have been ensnared in the system. So it's a great question, a huge aspect of the work. Yeah. And I think the last thing I would say about that is that when we think about the sort of civic fabric of the United States, right, it's very clear in a lot of social science research that any kind of connection to the system really decreases the amount that people want to show up and participate. And I think a huge aspect of that, right, we can see this documented, is about the stigma and the shame and the disrespect and the disdain that the criminal justice system heaps upon people. So when we go in to say we really care about all of it, what happened here, right, we're not sort of going to be Pollyanna-ish about the fact that people have done horrible things, but we know there's more to the story. It is, I think, a small attempt at trying to restore that fabric a little bit, to say that the news media doesn't have to play a role to perpetuate and compound the fraying of that fabric. So.
Very quickly, when we went first to the indigenous communities to organize the workshops, we heard, and this is very common from the indigenous communities, the idea of like, but journalists is the people that comes here, take a story, and they never come back, That's really common, kind of like in the indigenous communities. And then very quickly we understand that the best way to try to respect that into the workshops was like hiring local facilitators, and the workshops are led by local facilitators, which speaks the language, which actually understand the needs, and the facilitation is kind of like an effective way of course, connecting and merging the words of the journalists and the communities, and that has been also very key to create this kind of like cascade effect. And now for the second version of the contest, like we have a lot of like indigenous kind of like leaders interested in facilitate workshop for us.
And I think to get back to, for example, Max, they spent weeks speaking to 100 stakeholders in the community before they set an editorial agenda. And I think that really matters. Showing up and not prescribing anything is really one of the first things that you could do. You would not come to a party and be like, I'm the party animal, everyone must love me, right? You kind of come in and you read the room. Most people don't read the room when they start journalism, and I think that's really important. And it's really important then to also return, as Jonathan said, is the idea of you have to be able to be held accountable to the choices that you make and the kind of journalism that you do. And last but not least, I will say that misinformation and editorial misinformation is culturally specific. It is not just a fact or no fact kind of binary. It really is like, I will prey on your fears to actually bring about fear-mongering about a certain group that you don't like. And coming in with the same cultural specificity is also just as important to show that respect. We have 2 minutes and 48 seconds. Anyone else? Maybe people need to go to the bathroom? No, I'm happy. Yes, I see a hesitating hand. Yes.
It's like classic comment rather than a question, but I was really happy to see you all talking about that this, I mean, yeah. The fact that you can show editors that this matters and this isn't just like a moral enterprise, but it can actually, there is a massive sort of business case actually for impact, for deeply serving the communities that we're here to serve, that it can attract, yes, awards, but also funding. I think it's just increasingly when you do hear people talking more and more about impact, which is great that's happening, I think this is a key message that I want, people who aren't in this world to hear, that this isn't just a moral enterprise. Like if we're here to serve people, then, clearly if we give them something that's deeply valuable, they're going to value us more in a manner of ways. I don't know if you, yeah. yeah, the reason my hand was hesitant was because it wasn't a fully formed comment or question, but I just wanted to highlight that point that was made. Like, we should be hammering that home to editors. Like, there's a business case for this kind of work. I don't know if you want to say anything more.
Yeah, I would say that's a great point. Our most successful article in the history of our website is how to open a bank account if you're an undocumented immigrant. All of the stories we do that have actionable information outperform pretty much any of the news stories. These stories are successful, like flat out. And it makes sense. I mean, it's because you're asking people, well, what information do you want? And then you give it to them, and chances are there are other people who have the same question. So again and again, we see that. So it really does work.
If I could say one more thing to that point about going to the community and saying what is important about this here actually helps you figure out the scope of the potential impact, right? So again, if we just spent a year being like, here's all the things you need to know about this data that we scraped, we might miss the target. But we're in an election year, and we've realized that people are not voting for the system officials that impact the policy. And so we really honed in and said, okay, well, could we actually have some influence here, right? And so now in November, it'll take us a while to sort of figure out, but we've really narrowed in on, the goal is to try to get more people who are affected by the system voting for the system actors, right? And that was the community basically saying, we don't really care that much about plea deals. We really want to know about the judges.
Perfect.
No, very quickly, and it's very interesting because the media and the journalists and the horse ecosystem is asking all the time right now why intentionally 40% of the population is avoiding news. And I think that these examples are the kind of like, so maybe because we are not wondering enough how we really want to provide information, useful, kind of like incentives for the society and for the people that is affected by the climate issues, for example, and I think that this can be one of the keys of trying to continue decreasing news avoidance.
That about wraps us up. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.